it's 1 minute past 2. So that means we can begin starting right now. It's 1 minute past 2. And I hope you guys are ready. But I'm seeing many people have not yet joined, and I hope they don't keep on asking, what are we doing? What are we doing? So I think we can start because we only have 1 hour here. Okay, so today, basically, we must understand what we mean by the reflex arc, explaining it and all that stuff. And then we must also be able to state and describe the different types of reflex actions. Now, if time allows, I may also introduce to you the brain. That is, if time allows, I may introduce the brain so that next time we can now begin steam, which is made up, of course, of the brain and spinal cord. Now, for today, if you still remember, this is the structure that we looked at last time. This is the reflex arc structure. Okay, reflex arc structure showing the path of the spinal reflex. That is from the muscles, in case you have stepped on fire or you've been bitten by a snake or something has pierced you. So the impulses must move via your motor neuron, from the sensory neuron on that part of the skin where it has happened. Maybe a pin has pierced you. So they must move via the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. And inside the spinal cord, you can see that it has a butterfly-shaped kind of structure, which is the white matter, and surrounding it is the gray matter. Sorry, the white matter surrounding is white matter. Then that butterfly-shaped structure is the gray matter, and inside the gray matter you have the relay neuron or the interneuron, which synapse with the motor neuron that moves out via the spinal nerve. This is the spinal nerve to the muscles. So you must be knowing that. And I remember at that point, this is what we said, that an example of a simple reflex: when one accidentally touches a hot object by using a finger, the receptors in the finger receive the stimulus and change it into nervous impulses that travel along the sensory nerve. Now, to where? The spinal cord, and then across a synapse in the relay neurons. Now that impulse is handed over to the relay neuron in the spinal cord within the gray matter, okay? And then they cross to another synapse. The relay neuron in turn hands over the impulse to the motor neuron, and the motor neuron then carries the impulses from the spinal cord to the muscle or the gland involved. And then the muscle can be able to contract, and then the hand moves away from the hot object. So this is the same thing that normally happens for all those reactions. And we say that it is innate. You are born with it. You don't learn it. You are born with it. So that is what we looked at, by the way, last time. And then I remember we were able to discuss this question, which most of you were able to understand, and then you answered. Then to sum it up, there's this question which was brought in Acheiteka mock, and I think, remember, we were able to do this question as well, the one that was examined in Acheiteka mock. And then so today, as a starter package, I want us to first look at briefly. We shall not do everything in detail. As a starter package, as like a review, a starter question, I want us to look at this question of Waukesha mock, which was brought in 2019. And it says that the figure 1 below shows two different neurons, neuron A and then neuron B. Identify the type of neuron. Identify the type of neuron. So which one would be neuron A, and then which one would be neuron B. So you can raise your hand and then you give us the answer. Anyone? You just raise your hand and then you give us the answer. Alternatively, you can type your answer in the chat box. I'll be able to read it. Alternatively, you can type your answer in the chat box. I'll be able to read it. Blessing says that A is sensory neuron. Yes, Daphne. When I ask you to unmute, please do unmute very fast. Daphne. Yes, Daphne. Let me just sing.
Afternoon, class. Hello. Good afternoon. Let's wait for our teacher. There is a temporary glitch. Yes. Bbumba, welcome back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bbumba. My network today, I don't know what happened, but
Yeah,
I'll try to. Thank you. So this was the sensory. It's supposed to be sensory neuron. Sensory neuron, and then Daphne was still giving us the answer, and then I went off. Okay. And then Jessica says B is motor neuron. Okay. Motor neuron. Okay. And then part 2 says set 3 structural differences between neuron A and neuron B. So what would be those structural differences? You can raise your hand or type in the box as we say. So which structural differences are you able to see? We're having neuron A here, and then we're having neuron B here. I don't know whether the members present in today's class did not attend. Yes, Annette.
Master neuron, I think neuron A has a short axon, whereas neuron B has a longer axon.
Okay, thank you very much. That is one answer, which is very correct. Thank you, Annette. And then we're having Hola.
Teacher, neuron A has no nucleus, while neuron B has a nucleus.
Hey, what about this one here? Isn't this a nucleus for A? Hola. Both of them have a nucleus. I can see it there. That's a nucleus. That's a nucleus. And then, yes, Daphne.
Okay, master. I think neuron A has a body as a branch on the axis, and the motor neuron
And the motor neuron is? Okay. She stopped in the middle, but you can see that neuron B, its cell body is terminal at one end, but in neuron A, its cell body is like a branch. It's like an axon branch. Kauma. Yes, Kauma.
The cell neuron A transmits the impulse from the receptor to the central nervous system, while neuron B, the motor neuron, transmits the impulse from the central nervous system to the effectors.
Okay, thank you, Kauma. But Kauma,
Yes.
the question was very easy. It says structural
structure.
differences. Have you seen?
Yes.
Yeah, that answer is correct. But when they ask for structural, it will be wrong.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for
you.
that. Let me end with Tracy Hernese. She's off. Let me get Martin and Concy. Please, when I ask you to unmute, you do that very fast. Otherwise, you'll be wasting people's time. Then Colin says sensory neuron has the cell body, which is in the middle. That one we have already said. Then Blessing says neuron A has a long dendron. Neuron B has a shorty dendron. I think we can end at that. Then barefooted student steps on a sharp nail and jumps in pain. Give the name of this action. A barefooted student steps on a sharp nail and jumps in pain. Give the name of this action. Let me see here. Maria Tracy.
Neuron A has one dendron, while neuron B has several dendrons.
Yeah, but now Tracy, that is correct, but we have already left that question. We are now doing question B. Do you have the answer for part B?
Let me look for the answer.
Okay. Yes, Hola. Okay, let me, Asio Masi. Yes, Asio. Kauma and Jessica,
Reflex
they have given us
action.
the answer in the chat box. Mark says reflex action. Jessica says reflex action. Kauma says reflex action. Thank you for that. We can go to the next. Describe them. I'm going to go through that description because we have just looked at it, describing the reflex action. So that was what you would say if it had come. And then there was also this question, but I think it says, what is the functional unit in a nervous system? That is question 1. And then question 2 says, which one of the following represents a reflex arc? The reflex arc, the one which we just said already. So number 1, what would be the answer for number 1? What is the functional unit? In the chat box, Benjamin says, sir, are we doing exams next week? Those ones, no, we're not doing exams next week. But always there are assignments in Google Classroom. And if you realize your assignment is already there in Google Classroom for senior 3, for the previous week. It is there, so you go into Google Classroom and do that. Yes, Annette. I'm telling people to unmute, but they are delaying. Annette.
Master, I think it's the neuron.
Okay, that is very correct. The function unit is the neuron. Let me choose another for number 2. And then in the chat box here, Kauma says 1 is B, 2 is a D. Kauma has chosen D. That is from receptor to sensory to central nervous system to motor, then to effector. And I think she's right. We can go to the next question. So this is what we have been looking at. the reflex arc. It will come from the receptor, then the receptors take the impulses through the sensory nerves, then to the neuron, the central nervous system, then from the central nervous system via the motor neuron, which you must know. Now today, we can look at the types of reflex actions. The types of reflex actions, whereby we have 2, they can be grouped into 2. 1 is a simple reflex action, which are mediated by pathways in the spinal nerves and the spinal cord. Now, these simple reflexes or the simple reflex actions, they have characteristics. 1, they are extremely rapid, such as touching on a hot object, jumping when you've stepped on a nail, like that. And a given stimulus brings about the same response all the time in that particular species of the organism. For example, every one of you, whether you are a Muzungu, a white man, or a boy or a girl, whether you are a black man, whether you are an Indian, whether you are a Jew, as long as you are a person, it will be the same response. A black man, when they touch on a hot object, the response will be the same as the white man. So that is a given stimulus brings about the same response in that particular organism. Even if it is a baby, if a baby touches fire, I think you've ever seen them, they remove the hand very fast, but who has taught them to remove the hand? The thing is innate. That is another characteristic of them. They are not learned. You don't learn to do them, but they are instinct. That is, they are inborn. You are born with that ability. Then the condition reflex cranial reflex. To condition, Kauma says, I think another characteristic is that they are coordinated by either the spinal cord or brain. Yeah, it is true that they are coordinated by spinal cord, but these are the major. These are the major ones, which are unique by the brain, because it will involve learning. So that's why I chose these ones, because they are the unique ones. Thank you for that, Kauma. Then the conditioned reflex is a type of reflex which involves organisms learning to know and then to respond to a strange, meaningless stimulus by associating it with another meaningful, similar stimulus. And the most common example, as put for us by some guy who was called Ivan Pavlov. He was a Russian, Pavlov. So the famous Pavlov's experiment and Pavlov's dogs. Even if you go and you begin searching about Ivan Pavlov and his experiments, they will bring you that. Now, what did Pavlov do? You can see that when you ring a bell for a dog, a bell has nothing, has no meaning to a dog. You ring a bell, so what? So what? So initially, the dog doesn't know anything to do with the bell. But what Pavlov did was that he would ring a bell whenever he was giving food to the dog. Whenever he was giving food to the dog, he would first ring a bell, and then he brings the food. Now, when a dog looks at meat, a nyama, it salivates, and because it wants to eat, and it even begins shaking its tail. You can see that here it is salivating. Now, it reached a time that the dog learned that this bell means food, because the bell initially was meaningless. But now, it reached a time when Pavlov would ring a bell and the dog salivates. He would ring a bell, and even when there was no food. So that is the summary of Pavlov's experiment. Okay. Just a moment. Yeah. So here you can see that before, according to this scientist called Ivan Pavlov, he performed an experiment to demonstrate a conditioned, that is, you can learn something. And in the experiment, he used to give food to the dog at a particular time, and the dog would salivate either after the smell of the food or the taste of the food. So he then started ringing a bell before giving the dog food, and he did this several times, and you can see it here. Ring the food, the dog will salivate. Ring the bell, nothing. Then another one during conditioning. Ring the bell, bring the food, the dog salivates. Then after conditioning, he would ring a bell and then the dog would salivate. That means it had become a conditioned reflex. The dog had learned. And then after several times, of course, this is what I've just explained, very, very long time, the dog later stopped salivating. So for a conditioned reflex to be established, if you can see here, in this box is what I'm looking at. So for a conditioned reflex to be established, the brain is necessary. And thus the dog in Pavlov's experiment learned to associate the sound of the bell with food. So when Pavlov rang the bell without food for a long time, the dog later stopped salivating, implying that the conditioned reflex was temporary. It was temporary, but remember the other inborn is permanent. The innate one, the instinct one, is always permanent because you are born with it. Now, this is Ivan Pavlov in the 1800s there with some Russian generals. These were Russian generals. He was showing them his experiment, and this was his dog. Here they took a picture, and you can see them here, and some other clerics, the Orthodox. Now, characteristics for conditioned reflex action 1, it is temporary, as we have just said. It involves learning. It takes a longer time to learn. You can know, hey, you're not training something like a dog. It is a takes time. It is coordinated by the brain. It involves more than one stimulus, and then it involves an association of the stimulus. It is reinforced by repetition. You have to keep doing the same thing. You keep doing the same thing, and responses are involuntary. So like that, the thing just happens. And then characteristics between simple reflexes. I think even if I don't first look at them and I ask you, you guys, you can raise your hand and you tell me from what we have learned about the simple reflex actions and the conditioned reflex actions. What do you think are their similarities between the simple which we first looked at, and in this conditioned one Pavlov? So what similarities are you able to pick from what I've just explained? You can raise your hand, give us the answer. Hola. I think when I ask you to unmute, please do unmute very fast and you speak. Don't over delay. Margaret has failed to unmute. Let me choose.
Both are associated with stimulus.
Okay.
Both are associated with stimulus.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. That is correct. In both, there is a stimulus involved. Melissa Mushabe.
Thank you, teacher. They are both coordinated in the brain.
They are both coordinated in the brain. Yeah, it can be possible. But you first bring out those obvious ones, Mushabe. Then I'm seeing someone forgot to rename himself. He's calling himself Tekino, but you should always rename yourself.
Both involve neurons for transmission of impulses.
That is true in both the impulses. And then Peter says both are involuntary. Blessing says both involve the brain, both involve neurons for transmission of impulses. That is from the chat box. And then I think, yeah, we can continue. Consider that both involve the central nervous system, particularly the brain. Both are autonomic responses. Now, for some of you who don't know what autonomic responses means, I'll comment about the autonomic responses. I think I talked about autonomic responses when I was looking at the peripheral nervous system, because the peripheral nervous system is divided into the autonomic and then the somatic. Then both are associated with the stimulus. You guys have given this answer, and then both involve neurons for transmission of impulses. I think, yeah, you gave me those answers already. And then differences between simple and conditioned. With conditioned, the stimulus and responses are not directly related. That is with conditioned, because you can imagine, how is the bell related to food? But with the simple, stimulus and response are related. Some people are having questions here. Yes, Francis. Francis, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir,
Yes.
what I was saying was my network was kind of breaking on the part for the similarities. Can you please repeat them a little bit?
Okay. Let us repeat the similarities for passes. Okay, let me go back to the previous slide. Oh, sorry for that. Yeah, so this is what we said. This is what we gave about similarities. Similarities, for some of you, may not be knowing. What are those things that make them appear like the same things that are in each? What are those similar things that are in each aspect of? If you have forgotten, and if you want to understand it clearly, think of such as a simple reflex. And then for a condition, think of the Pavlov's experiment. Ringing a bell, bring food, the dog salivates. Bring food without the bell, the dog salivates. Bring the bell without food, the dog doesn't. But then after conditioning the bell with the food, the dog can salivate even when you have no food and you have rang a bell. And the thing is that response is involuntary, meaning that the dog doesn't first think before it salivates. It just happens automatically. You can imagine. Have you, like the involuntary actions, when we are talking about them, you don't think, you cannot think, you cannot just decide, let's say, and you say, let my heart stop pumping. Can you? Or let my intestines stop digesting food. You have no control over the involuntary actions. But for the voluntary, you have control. So these were the similarities that both involve the central nervous system, which is the brain, but particularly the brain. Then both are autonomic. That is, they are involved in voluntary actions. That is, you don't first think, like to salivate, the dog doesn't first think. It just occurs automatically. Then both are associated with the stimulus. That was the food as the stimulus, but in the simple, it was fire or something, a pin pricking you or a knife cutting you, like that. Then both involve neurons for the transmission of impulses, because in both, impulses must travel from the sensory to the central nervous system, and then from there back to the effector organ. So I think those are very clear. And then we had just looked at the conditioned reflexes, differences between conditioned and simple. In simple, only one stimulus, like fire, is involved. Then no learning is simple. You are born with it. When a baby touches fire, the response that it experiences is the same as the one you learn. Simple takes a very short time. Okay. Simple coordinated in either this brain or spinal cord, but the condition, it is coordinated by the brain only. And then the response can occur instantly after a stimulus, but in the condition, it must be a repetitive action with practice even involved. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, which looks at similarities between reflex and the voluntary actions. Remember, voluntary, like to do voluntary, it is something you do because you want. And if you are doing because you want, it means you first think, and then you say, okay, let me walk. Okay, let me sit. Okay, let me go. You see? But for the involuntary actions, you do not first think. It just happens. You cannot say, let my heart stop pumping. Let me stop breathing for 1 hour. I'll resume after 1 hour. You see? So you must understand that. So both reflex and voluntary actions, they are coordinated by the central nervous system, and both occur as a result of impulse transmission. Voluntary, they are not spontaneous. They don't just happen immediately. Spontaneous means something that just happens immediately, and then it goes on and goes on. So for voluntary, you have to think and you say, should I go? Should I not go? But for the reflex, it just occurs rapidly or spontaneously. It is very slow because you have to think whether you should eat food or not. But for reflex, it's very fast. Initiated by the brain, because the brain is the one that thinks, but for reflex, it doesn't have to be initiated by the brain. Three neurons are involved here. There are very many. Like your brain is made up of billions of cells that actually carry out that coordination. And then good enough, when I look at the time, I don't know whether it's me who has moved very, very fast. But I think we have reached the brain. So the central nervous system, actually. So the central nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord. Now, today, I think I'm going to introduce to you the brain, and then we understand it. Where is it located? It's located, wait, just a moment. It's located in your skull, this cranium. And I'm going to first show you some information by the early scientists, what they thought the brain was. Because can you imagine the people who are here in the brain? What is it? Or what would you try to ask yourself such a question? In 335 BC, that is before Jesus Christ was born, Greek philosophers like Aristotle thought that the brain was simply a radiator. For some of you who know things about the car, and that kept the all-important heart from overheating. They thought that the heart was the most important organ. So the brain is like the radiator that prevents the heart from overheating, since it was pumping blood a lot. And around 170 BC, Roman physician Galen suggested the brain is for ventricles. That is fluid-filled cavities. Now, if you look at this age, from 335 then to 170, long time ago before Christ was born, the calendar which they were using, they would count from 1000 up to 0. Up to 0. So in other words, you would be born in, let's say, 900. And let's say you die in 800, like that. So they would count from 1000 to 0, and then that century is gone. They go back like that to the new calendar which we are using now. And then they started counting, and now we have counted 2021 years since the start of this calendar. So that's why here they are showing that this guy first suggested, that is Aristotle, in 335, but then another one came in 170. I think you can be able to see that difference. Now, around 170 BC, Roman physician, a physician is like a doctor. Galen suggested the brain is for ventricles, where the seat of complex thought and determined personality and bodily functions. This was one of the first suggestions that the brain was where our memory, personality, and thinking reside. So that is before Galen. People never thought that the brain is the one that makes you to think. Maybe some of you may take it to be obvious, but it is not obvious, because maybe you've learned since you are born that the brain is the one, but these people didn't know that actually it is the brain that makes people think. It is the brain that makes someone's personality. Actually, if you didn't know, what you people normally call that follow your heart, that my heart is telling me this, it is your brain which is telling you that, not your heart. Semanya, you have broken my heart. Semanya bichi, they have never broken your heart. They have maybe breaking your brain. You should get it from today. It is your brain, not your heart. I think that thing from before Christ, people still retained it, that it is the heart that thinks, that your heart is the one, you see. So you must understand now in 1791, in the first suggestion that electrical impulses were important in the nervous system. Now, an Italian, Luigi Galvani, showed that electricity applied to nerves could make muscles to contract. Now, people here were beginning to learn much about this, the nerves. That is 1791. By the way, it's not very far. It's not very far. Now, in the 16th century, a Belgian anatomist, Andreas Vesalius, created a highly detailed map of the nervous system. That is in the 1600s. Now, this Andreas guy, he was one of the people who would ask people to give him dead bodies, say that he would cut them, dissect them, to study about them. And actually, people started donating their dead bodies to this guy, who was called Andreas Vesalius. Then they began 1848, an American railroad worker, an American railroad worker. These people were making the the railroads. Phineas Cage had an iron rod strike his head. A rod is like a stick, but it was an iron, like a katayimbwa. In Uganda, it's called a katayimbwa. So that iron rod had to strike his head, passing through his left frontal lobe. You can imagine, I'm assuming this was Cage, Phineas was working there. Now a katayimbwa comes and then slices through the frontal lobe. You can imagine on one side. Of course, here I can't draw the 3D side that you can see that it has passed through here. And then he survived, but aspects of his personality changed, suggesting that specific brain regions were important for certain functions. Because before, everyone thought that the moment you shoot someone in the head, something occurs in the head, someone dies instantly. But when this happened, when they were constructing the railway in America in 1848, that's when they said, kumbe the brain has different regions and each region controls certain parts. So this idea grew stronger after studies in 1860 to 70s by physicians Paul Broca and Carl Wernicke. And they showed that the specific parts of the brain were dedicated to different components of speech. Because in the brain, that's why some people are born when they are called those who cannot speak. I don't know how they call them in Uganda, but there are people who cannot speak and they can't hear. So there are different parts of the brain that control speech, smell, all those other different portions of the brain. Then in 1932, for some of you who don't know, some of us were born in the 1900s, 19 something. Although most of you have been born here in 2000, but some of us have been born in the 1900s. You see, so the thing is not very far. In 1932, such as Sherrington and Edgar Adrian won the Nobel Prize for proposing the concept of synapses, that is junctions between neurons pictured, which advanced the understanding of the central nervous system. Then also Alan Hodgkin, Andrew Huxley, and Australian surgeon Eccles won a Nobel Prize in 1960 electrical and chemical signaling. So what we are studying actually are the studies that these people put in writing in their own handwritings actually. People like Alan Hodgkin, Andrew Huxley, and Australian surgeon Eccles. These things of synapse electrical, which the transmission of an impulse that I was teaching you in the earlier lesson, those are the things that these people put forth. Okay. Now, if you have understood how the brain and how the scientists have come to understand actually how the brain functions, then we can now dig deep into understanding the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. Now, it should be noted, I'm assuming this is your head. Okay, these are your eyes, your nose. Okay, you have a vertebral bone. This is your vertebral bone. That's your vertebral bone. Now, the thing that makes you think, connect everything, runs from your skull, akawanga, that is the brain. And then the brain continues up to your bum, where the vertebral bone, the tailbone, which is called coccyx, stops. So that means the brain is a continuation from your head through your vertebral bones downward. But as I've told you, each part of the brain controls certain activities. Now, this spinal cord within the vertebral bones in the middle, for it controls most of the somatic actions. These things of you want to wave to someone, you want to call someone using actions, you want to walk. You see, they are all controlled within the spinal cord here. Now, the moment one of these vertebral bones gets a problem, maybe pushes against the spinal cord in the middle, that is trouble. You may never walk again your entire life. And you find that you can even just lay on bed when you cannot turn. When you want to, let's say, urinate, someone has to come and help you move. They just have to turn you. You cannot even wave at someone, but you can think, you can laugh, you can do anything here in your brain. But the moment that spinal cord has been damaged, my friend, you cannot even move your small finger. That's how important that part is within the backbone. Okay, so I think we are going to begin by understanding what is inside our bone, our skull. Okay, now when you open up your skull, of course, scientists, those of you who study neuroscience, and maybe probably become neurosurgeons, you will be able to operate on someone's brain. Now, this is the structure of the brain in the transverse section. What do I mean by not transverse, longitudinal section? I'm assuming this is your head. I'm assuming this is your head. Those are your lips. Okay, that's your head. Now, imagine getting over a knife, over a what, and they cut through straight like that, so that you get one half this side and another half the other side, the left side and the right side. That is cutting the head between the left and right side. This is what you're going to see in the middle. This is what we call a longitudinal section through the brain. Now, the upper part of the brain, this one, that's where you're going to find the cerebrum. That is the cerebrum. Now, from there are some layers. Of course, those layers, we don't say about them here at this level. So we go to the midbrain, where you have the thalamus, which is some swelling there, is the hypothalamus. I think you can be able to see that small hypothalamus. Now, below the hypothalamus is a structure which is normally called the master gland. Its shape is in shape of balls. It looks like testicles, a human testicles. That's how the shape is. So it's called the pituitary gland, and many scientists refer to it as the master gland because it controls most of the other glands in your body. Now, as you're moving from the pituitary, then as you're moving close to the spinal cord, you have the brain stem where you have the medulla. This medulla is very much sensitive because it controls all the involuntary activities such as the heart rate, breathing rate, all those things. And in surgery, in case this thing is disturbed, even by touching it, you die immediately. You die, you don't come back. So this is very much important. And then you have in your one corner where you have towards the back, you have the cerebellum. Now, please take note, cerebellum is different from cerebrum. Cerebrum is that upper part, but in this side of one corner, you have cerebellum. Now, this cerebellum controls and coordinates balancing organs and muscles. And in most cases, when you are fighting with someone, please never hit anyone in the corner, whether using a stick or punch. Please don't bother hitting someone in the corner. I don't know how they call corner in English, but when you hit someone here in the front side, in the forehead, the person will just develop a kamonde, a swelling. You see, you just develop a kamonde. But the moment you hit hard here, you're going to shake these parts here vigorously. And when they are shaken, the person sleeps immediately. So someone can collapse by hitting hard here. Someone can easily collapse. And if unfortunate, he may never regain consciousness. He may die. he may die. So you don't play with this part here. Okay. And then from here, this is part is what we call the brain stem. Then moving down, you go to the spinal cord. This is the spinal cord that I've been talking of, that is in between your vertebral bones. In Uganda, vertebral bones are called enkizi. So when you hear someone amenye enkizi, that means you're breaking my vertebral bones. Those ones are the ones that make you stand upright. Now, in between them are those nerves, the spinal cord, and then on it arises certain nerves that coordinate all your movements everywhere. So you must understand that the brain, of course, is made up of the cerebellum, the thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary. Now, these are just basic parts which are important. But of course, you can look at it in different dimension. So I think this is what I wanted to discuss today. In case you have any question, feel free to raise your hand and you ask. Raise your hand and you ask any question concerning today's lesson, and then I will be able to respond. And then afterwards, we end the lesson. Because you've over listened to me. So is there any question so far? Now I don't know this guy's name, but he's called ITEL. People forget to name themselves. Please ask your question. Mary says that I have not understood. Okay, Faith.
Teacher, I joined a bit late, so I was requesting you take back some of the pages before this one of the brain, because I want to take some screenshots.
Faith, this work has already been uploaded in Google Classroom. It is there.
Okay, thank you.
Faith?
Yeah.
Yeah, I put this yesterday. They are already there.
Okay.
You can be able to have free access to them. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, teacher.
You're welcome. Now, Mary is saying that she has not understood anything. Now, you should have already asked. You see, you guys, when you're not getting me, when you're not understanding, please ask from the first slide. Don't wait until the lesson is finished and you say, "Hey, we have not understood anything." And then Chirabo says, "Will the work be sent? Because I have never received any biology work." Go there right now. Google Classroom topic biology. You'll find the work. All our lessons are there. Kauma says, "Does it mean that people who slash have bent vertebral bones?" What do you mean, Kauma? Please clarify more. Then Joel, yes, Joel. Peter says, "What makes the cerebrum swell?" I didn't say that the cerebrum swells. No, please don't get me badly. When you are given someone and they hit you with a nyondo, it is not the cerebellum that swells. No, it is the tissues here, because it is already protected by your skull. Your skull is very hard, and that's why even if when you die and you begin decomposing, your skull remains. So it is not the cerebrum which swells. Please don't get me poorly. Then like people who walk with a bent back, like bending. Okay, I'm going to comment about that. Then Chiro says, "Is the backbone the same as spinal cord?" No. The backbone is not the same as spinal cord. And then Viola.
So,
We are left with about, yes, Viola.
are you listening to me, teacher?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was asking, why do when people grow up, like when they are in their old age, why do they bend? Like what happens to their vertebral column? That was my question.
Okay, thank you for that question, Viola. Let me also pick Joel's question.
You're welcome, teacher.
Yes, Joel. Joel, can you ask your question very fast? When you raise your hand and I ask you to unmute, you should be able to unmute very fast. Olanya says, okay, that one. Olanya says that I'm having difficulty signing into Google Class. First answer Viola's question. Now, Viola's question has nothing to do with the central nervous system, that is brain and spinal cord. Actually, her question has to do with the bones. Now, when we are learning locomotion, in biology, we also have a topic called locomotion. That is when you can ask such a question. But in summary, I can tell you that there are very many diseases that affect bones. And each day, and I repeat, each day, each month, there is a percentage of your skeleton that keeps on reducing. It can keep on reducing, especially for people who even never do exercises. Your bones. Now, this study was very much studied after certain scientists went to the moon. I think you've heard of people who go to space. Now, those people would lose their skeleton. Part of their skeleton keeps on degrading every month. And it would be very hard for you to stay in space for like 10 years because you would keep on losing and losing part of your skeleton. So what they normally do to reduce the rate of loss of the skeleton is to keep on exercising. They keep on exercising their bodies, so that the body keeps on making and making more and more. So I think to answer more of why someone may begin bending as they are growing, or why some people are born when they are somehow bent, you should ask such a question when we have reached the topic called locomotion. There I'll be able to explain to you everything in detail, because here I don't want to use terminologies to do with the bones, yet we are still doing nerves. Okay. There are no more questions and we are left with 1 minute. Okay. You've been a great class. Bye-bye and enjoy yourselves. Bye-bye.